Have you ever asked yourself the question, why does the Bible keep changing the subject so much? Especially as we study through the book of James. Why does James keep changing the subject to be on one thing and then bip, he's somewhere else? Does James really change the subject? Does he really shift that much? Or is it, perhaps, that we're not seeing the forest for the trees, and that he really is on one subject when he seems to change subject? What do you think? Let's look into it. We're working through the book of James, a verse at a time, and we're somewhere in chapter 2 here. Let's see. We are at verse 11, and he has just said, whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. So now, James 2, verse 11. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. If you do not commit adultery, but do commit murder, you have become a lawbreaker. All right. But just at the beginning of the paragraph, he was talking about the royal law, love your neighbor as yourself. Then he starts talking about favoritism and not showing favoritism. And then he's talking about the law, and all of a sudden he's talking about murder and adultery. What's going on here? Well, James is in an apostolic position, and John certainly is an apostle, and I think that they're teaching the same thing. So let's see what the apostle John says about it in his first letter, 3rd chapter, beginning also at verse 11. This is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. Ooh, we're getting onto the subject of murder now. And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Do not be surprised, my brothers, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love our brothers. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life in him. Bunch of tough stuff there. But it says that whoever hates his brother is a murderer. And this is not the only place in the Bible it talks about this equation. Murder and hatred and murder go together. We try to see them separately. Yeah, it's okay to hate. You just can't let it get to the point of murder. The Bible doesn't see it that way. It just says, if you hate, you're a murderer. The one is just the other acted out, brought to its logical conclusion. So now we start seeing some sense of harmony here. He's talking about if you keep the whole law and yet stumble at one point, you're guilty of all of it. And what is this murder he's talking about here? Oh, well, it's hating your brother. So he was balancing just before, on the one hand, love your neighbor as yourself. On the other hand, showing favoritism, despising the poor. If you despise the poor, you're treating them as if they're nothing, as if they don't exist, as if they're dead. That's a form of murder right there, isn't it? So, no matter how much we pride ourselves in our morality, he's saying here that if we despise our brother, we hate our brother, we fail to love our brother as ourselves, we're no different than the murderer. And we know that the murderer has no life in him. The standard that we're being held to is very high. And unfortunately, too many people are trying to make the only standard some intellectual acknowledgement once in a lifetime of certain biblical truth, and that everything else is a don't care. Now, we don't earn our way to salvation. We can't. The bar is so high that no one meets up to it. True faith, real faith, the faith that James talks about all through this book of James, the faith that we see in Hebrews 11 worked out in so many people's lives, will bring about change in behavior. We're not saved by the behavior. We are saved by the faith that changes our behavior. As we'll see farther down in this chapter, faith that doesn't bring about a change of behavior isn't really faith at all.